Hey guys, good morning. Welcome to Coffee with a Pastor. I'm gonna wait for some people to hop on. I always have this fear that I'm on my own page and not on the church page, but I feel like I'm on the church page. So as soon as someone hops on, maybe you can let me know. But I feel like I am, right? Oh gosh. Fran, am I on the church page? Someone tell me. Hi guys. Hi Matt, Jana, Zach, Peyton. Somebody tell me if I'm on the church page. I think Jana's saying yes. Phew. I just feel so much safer in the church page space. Hi Brittany. Hi Tammy, and maybe Jeff too. While we're waiting for people to hop on, we had a great dig deep last night. Thank you. A lot of you that are signing on right now were in there. Thank you for being there. Hi Tiffany. It was so good. Zuniga never disappoints. I did record it and I got to figure out how to compress it and trim it and get it up for those of you who missed it. So I'll let you know as soon as that happens. We'll push out some social media stuff. I have my laptop up today because I have several things I want to reference. Hi Naomi. Yeah, David Zuniga is amazing. We met him through interfaith work 6 or 7 years ago, and he has just done all of these talks for us for no cost, which is such a gift because, you know, we don't exactly have tons of spare change lying around. Hi, Tori. I wanted to remind you guys that this coming Thursday, a week from yesterday, we have John Singletary coming on to teach us about the Enneagram for 2 weeks. And we wanted to do 2 weeks because these are only 1 hour workshops, and the Enneagram gets so much engagement. It's such a helpful tool for coping with stress, understanding our relationships better, and in these strange times, very relevant. So we do ask that you have some knowledge already on the Enneagram, and we have, if you go look at our social media posts that are going to be coming out today and in the coming weeks, we have some suggestions if you need to do a little quick reading. So you can be ready, because we're not going to be, it's not Enneagram 101. It's going to be like, you know, like a little bit deeper into the Enneagram. So please go register for that. And yeah, okay, I think I'm going to get going on this talk. I wanted to talk to you guys. I actually had this planned all week to talk about navigating predominantly white contexts as a person of color. And I really wanted to talk about this because so much has been going on in the last few weeks, especially with Ahmaud and Breonna and all of these racial injustices happening that are big. Well, there's real people involved, obviously, but this is like really systemic issues being revealed that have always been there, but we're just continuing to work through those to see that the way that white people confront those realities are different from how Black people do or people of color do. And so we're talking a lot about white supremacy. We're talking a lot about race. And I just wanted to get vulnerable for a little bit and chat about navigating the predominantly white context that our faith community is as a person of color, because I'm not the only person in our community who doesn't identify as white. And it's really important to me that the people in our community who are people of color have a sense of solidarity and have a sense of knowing how to navigate these conversations as a person who's not white and who doesn't take the message of white supremacy in the exact same way that a white person has to take it. And so I wanted to talk about the intricacies of that today, what it feels like in my own skin. And I wanted to also share, because for those of you who are white, I want you to hear this and hope that you will engage in the conversation. I want to hear from you, what you're thinking, especially because, as Brittany just said, this is really vulnerable, and I'm going to have a major vulnerability hangover after this. And so I'm just going to go ahead and say that your feedback is appreciated. So I linked to a couple of resources for this conversation, my own work. The first is a Progressing Spirit article that I wrote, and I really wanted to link to it because, well, first of all, it was published the day that my family started social distancing, and the whole world was falling apart, and everybody was freaking out and figuring out what they were going to do, and nobody was interested in a random article I wrote, which I wasn't even interested, so I totally get it. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, it's a part 1 article, and I'm writing a part 2 now, and so I'm thinking about it. So I wanted to just reference the very, very end of it. This article is from Progressing Spirit. You can go to progressingspirit.com. It's a subscription-based site, so you can't access the article unless you pay to have a monthly subscription. I recommend you do that because it's only $4 a month. You will go down the list of writers and wonder why I'm even on the list, because the writers are amazing. Fran writes for them regularly as well. We're putting out content, and because it's a subscription-based service, we can actually be paid for our work as writers. And so I encourage you to go look at that. But I'm just going to sort of quote the very last bit as a way to explain why this conversation is relevant. Thanks, Tammy. Okay, so I say at the very end, each of us were made in God's own image, Imago Dei. This is the Imago Dei theology. This is why we do the work, beginning with ourselves. It's why we ask ourselves the ongoing question, what is keeping me bound? Surviving is not good enough, but if we're going to thrive, we must be free of anything that keeps us from the good work of liberation. This idea of breaking free, the article is called Breaking Free from Supremacy Theology. This idea of breaking free is something each one of us ought to consider for the sake of our collective wholeness. Our ability to thrive is limited when we are not fully living into the power of our Imago Dei, but the catch is, if one of us is bound, so is the other. You aren't free until I'm free. And I will never be free until you know the fullness of liberation. We are connected. We are in this gritty and beautiful work together. And the reason why this is relevant to me, that we talk about race, it's why it's relevant to me that you listen to my race story, that I listen to your experience with race, because we are all bound by the power, the domination system of white supremacy. And anybody that thinks they're not has way more work to do than the rest of us. We are all bound by the domination system of white supremacy. That's a lot of big words. That's a lot of macro systemic thinking. So I want to bring it down to earth just a little bit and share my story, my race story, what it's like for me to grow up. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this at all, but I'm just going to share a few of the things that were common, or a few of the things that I experienced as a kid growing up. And if you are a person of color watching this, I invite you to share some experiences, whether they were blatant, whether they were small. Please share in the comments. I invite you to, so people can kind of get a sense of what it's like to grow up in your skin. So I grew up in a really small town in North Louisiana, rural area, super evangelical, Southern Baptist, and my family moved there from the north, from Chicago, and we were the only brown family in town at the time that I was growing up. There were, especially when I was in elementary school and younger, there were white people, there were black people. This is the language that the people of the town used, by the way. But there was nobody that looked like me So growing up in this liminal space was interesting because I never really felt accepted, but I grew up in a white neighborhood. And so I sort of grew up in a white context, although at school it was more of a black context because most of the white people went to a private school. The private school had a Confederate flag, and the rebel was their mascot, yeah, it was crazy. There was a white side of town, black side of town. There was a white side and black side at the doctor's office. There was a white swimming pool and a black swimming pool. Even on my homecoming court, there was a white and black representative for each homecoming court representative. And so this is the type of context that I grew up in. It was very, very racially tense. And that, yeah, I don't remember, Matt, if it was, I don't think they said they're Christian, but anyway, that was the kind of context though that I grew up in, that it was there was a lot of racial tension, and to be racist was not, it was not out of the ordinary. In fact, I remember when I was a little kid and the KKK were rallying in the town square, and my mom told me I couldn't go outside and play that day. I had to stay inside all day. And that's the first time I remember my sister, who was 5 years older than me, explaining to me, you're not safe because you're brown. You're not safe because you're Catholic. So we have to stay inside, and tomorrow you can go outside again. And I remember seeing a picture in the newspaper of it. That's blatant, right? But that's not my everyday life. But it did normalize the microaggressions that I experienced. So, for example, I'll never forget how in elementary school, my best friend's mom treated me differently than the other kids. I know, Brittany, it's crazy. I don't even think she meant to, but she did. She openly preferred her being friends with other little girls who were more aka white, and would relay this information in front of me to the point where I knew it and I caught on. I got asked, "What are you?" all the time by teachers, by adults. What are you? Like, don't ask that to a child ever. I used to stay out of the sun in the summer because I was so ashamed of my brown skin. In middle school, I was teased relentlessly for being Mexican. People would make jokes throughout my life about it, and it would it still gets me, right? Here I am. My sister dated a white boy or two whose parents were against the relationship and tried to ban them from seeing each other. I dated a guy in high school whose parents said it was okay, but only because I wasn't black, but he had to ask permission. So all these little things were like woven into my being every single day. And the reason why I think this is relevant, I don't think I have to prove to you, but the reason why this is relevant is because the microaggressions are the worst. We can all agree that blatant racism is bad. When we see Ahmaud Arbery get shot in the middle of the street by racist people, we can all collectively agree. I saw my feed, people that have such different theologies, political views, everyone was upset about it, as they should be. But what I'm trying to say is that the microaggressions that both he grew up with and the privilege that the people that killed him were born with and perpetuated those microaggressions with never a slap on the wrist is what led to that day. So we have to get to a point where we stop saying that these microaggressions are okay, or we don't acknowledge them. Does that make sense? I always use this metaphor of like the crazy ex to explain how it makes me feel as a person of color, because my relationship with white supremacy is more subtle than it is blatant. And it makes me feel like I'm that person in an emotionally unhealthy relationship, or even an emotionally abusive relationship, where I'm like, am I crazy? Wait, maybe it's just me. And I keep going back because I'm like, every time I think it's wrong and I step away from it and start to like untangle myself from it, I think maybe I'm crazy. Maybe that wasn't racist. And the thing is like white people, and I don't mean to like make you squirm, but white people, in my experience, seem to think that things are okay that aren't. And so they'll justify things to you. And as a person of color, and you just have learned throughout life to just not say anything. And so that's kind of how I spent my life, but then I got free, right? Then I learned about liberation theology, and my friends who are doing liberation work taught me, and I sat at their feet, and I'm still sitting at their feet. And I realized I had to go back into my life and process all this, and I'm still doing that. It's only a couple of years old, and I'm realizing how much I need to be untangled from, and how much was racist, that I was like, oh, that's not racist. And so it's hard because people that are good people that love God, people that love you as a person of color, say things all the time that they don't realize are really hurtful. And so I'm saying all this because I think that a lot of things need to change, but one very tangible thing I would give you to take away from today that needs to change is that we need to let the definition of racism become bottom up. It's not right now, okay? So part of white privilege is that the dominant culture thinks that it gets to define racism. This is a lie that sustains and perpetuates white supremacy. Within this dominant narrative or domination system definition, within this definition, microaggressions don't count as racism. Good intentions are excused even when they cause harm. Mediocrity is enough. Defensiveness is righteousness. And the illusion of peace is favored over the peace of Christ, which is actually very disruptive and uncomfortable in nature. But when we listen to the people on the margins, when we let these people speak, when we push past ego and pride, and we let these people on the margins define racism from the bottom up, meaning using their lived experience, then we can actually do some real anti-racism work that is actually productive and actually makes real change in our society, change that brings us toward the kingdom of God. This is all we're trying to do, right? This is what we're trying to do at Peace of Christ Church. But the hard part of this, and I think that so many in our community are getting so practiced at this that you guys amaze me and I feel so safe in this little cocoon. But the hard part about doing this, about letting this definition be from the bottom up, is that white people have to drop the hang up with the language. Like, that's part of the work. So if a Black, Indigenous, or person of color says something is racist or calls out racism, part of the work is like listening to that and letting it stew, even though we've all been trained to think that racists are KKK, or racists are skinheads, or racists are white supremacists. It hurts you to hear that, right? Because you're not racist. You love, you have good intentions. But we have to stop doing that and let the people of color define what's racist and not react by that with the same old system, the same old definition, that's created by the domination systems to sustain the evils of white supremacy. So, as someone who navigates a predominantly white world, I am the recipient, and I'm the recipient of microaggressions every day. I'm the recipient of this unnamed expectation to speak a different language. I don't mean English to Spanish or Spanish to English or some other, I mean code switching, expected to, just from birth, and betrayed over and over again when my voice is silenced, or when I'm not spoken for or taken up for, when I'm speaking something that's true from my lived experience. It's so exhausting. And so I just want to contribute these thoughts to the conversation that our community is having about race, because we're not going to stop that conversation. And I really want to speak to the people of color in our community and say, like, I see you and I'm with you. And if you don't, identify as white, maybe you're wondering, how do I participate and listen in this community? How do I navigate this community? Because I'm not in the majority. I want to offer some solidarity to that experience and say, like, we are on it. Me and Matthew and Fran are having these conversations, and we're committed to the complexities of anti-racism work and how to hold space for everybody, as we're all seeking the same thing, which is to take down, dismantle, burn to the ground white supremacy. And so I want to end with a poem that I wrote, just because I feel like it fits. A lot of you have heard this poem because it's a spoken word poem that I did at the Nevertheless You Preach conference, and a lot of you have heard it or saw the video floating around. But I just thought it would be good to end with it for those of you who haven't. Alrighty, so it's called The Color of Dirt. Do you know what it's like to be treated like dirt because your skin is the color of it? My grandmother was born and raised in the border town of Brownsville, Texas. Truly a Tejana, she was in between two countries, in between two languages, in between two cultures, always in between. For a time, she was a migrant worker who found her way to Chicago, where her 5 kids were born. I knew her in Louisiana, always sitting in that one chair at that same kitchen table, natural light flooding in the room, sunflower placemats. I can still see her sitting there. Her final years were cool summers and wet winters under the cloudy skies of Oregon, but it never mattered where she moved. She was in between, always in between. It's the kind of in-betweenness that begins with external voices, but over time seeps into your pores, your gut, your soul, and settles into your own internal dialogue. This was her unchosen inheritance passed down to her children and their children. When I was a little girl, my abuelita used to tell my older sister, always go out with your face on. Put your nicest clothes on or they'll assume you're a migrant worker. In fact, just the other day, after my sister was racially profiled at the doctor's office, she later recalled to me, I did everything right. I got dressed, no sweats. I spoke well, just like Grandma always said. Do you know what it's like to be treated like dirt because your skin is the color of it? My grandma knew, my sister knew, I learned young too. Racism, sexism, social manipulation, and microaggressions, these have been my teachers drilling into my head the mantra of in-betweenness. You are not enough. You are too much. You don't fit the mold. You don't belong. Do you know what it's like to be treated like dirt because your skin is the color of it? For too long, I have filtered my fire and reconfigured as required. I've gone to sleep to the deepest parts of me, but now I'm shaking myself, trying to wake up and get free, because I have been told no, or you can't, so many times and in so many ways, and yet look at where I stand. I'm a pastor leading a beautiful congregation, and people are listening. And it makes me wonder if so many good can happen anyway, if so much good can happen despite all the no's and you can'ts, what will happen when I cast off my shame, when I let myself rise, when I take up all my space? Because beautiful things come from the earth, they come from the black and brown soil, flowers grow in the fucking dirt. And I'll bloom too. I'll speak my truth as if I had no choice, without apology, shoulders back, chin up. I will use my brown woman's voice. All right, guys, sorry so long. Thanks for listening. Thanks for letting me be vulnerable. and I will talk to you later. Have a good weekend.